ॐ श्रीकृष्ण शरणं मम गोपिका जीवनस्मरणं गोविन्दा गोविन्दा सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय। शुक्लांभरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। नमो नमः सद्गुरुभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो नमः सद्गुरुभ्यो नमो नमः। सच्चिदानन्दरूपाय विश्वोत्पत्त्यादिहेतवे तापत्रय विनाशाय श्रीकृष्णाय वयं नुमः। यं प्रव्रजन्तमनुपेतमपेतकृत्यं द्वैपायनो विरह कातर आजुहाव पुत्रेति तन्मयतया तरवोऽभिनेदुः तं सर्वभूतहृदयं मुनिमानतोऽस्मि। यस्वानुभावमखिलश्रुतिसारमेकम् अध्यात्मदीपमतितितीर्षतां तमोन्धं संसारिणां करुणयाः पुराणगुह्यं तं व्याससूनुमुपयामि गुरुं मुनीनां। योगीन्द्राय नमस्तस्मै शुकाय ब्रह्मरूपिणे संसारसर्पदष्टं यो विष्णुरातममुमुचत कालव्यालमुखग्रास त्रासनिर्नाशहेतवे श्रीमद्भागवतं शास्त्रं कलौकीरेण भाषितम् एतस्मादपरं किञ्चित् मनःशुद्ध्यै न विद्यते जन्मान्तरे भवेत् पुण्यं तदा भागवतं लभेत् ज्ञानवैराग्यसम्पूर्णान् हरिभक्तिपरायणान् पूर्वाचार्यात् अहं वन्दे सम्प्रदायप्रवर्तकान् भगवन्नाम साम्राज्य लक्ष्मी सर्वस्व विग्रहं श्रीमद्बोधेन्द्र योगीन्द्र देशिकेन्द्रम् उपास्महे। कलिकालोचितं धर्मं नाम संकीर्तनात्मकं निर्णेतुम् अवतीर्णं तं प्रेमिकं सद्गुरुं भजे। हरे रामेति कृष्णेति नाम संकीर्तनं सदा लोकक्षेमाय कुर्वन्तं प्रेमिकं सद्गुरुं भजे। जन्माद्यस्य यतोऽन्वयादितरतश्चार्तेष्वभिज्ञस्वराट् तेने ब्रह्महृदाय आदिकवये मुह्यन्ति यत्सूरयः तेजो वारिमृदां यथा विनिमयो यत्र त्रिसर्गो मृषा धाम्ना स्वेन सदा निरस्तकुहकं सत्यं परं धीमहि धर्मः प्रोज्झितकैतवोऽत्र परमो निर्मत्सराणां सतां वेद्यं वास्तवमत्र वस्तु शिवदं तापत्रयोन्मूलनं श्रीमद्भागवते महामुनिकृते किं वा परैरीश्वरः सद्यो हृद्यवरुध्यते प्रकृतिभिः शुश्रूषिभिस्तत्क्षणात् निगमकल्पतरोर्गलितं फलं शुकमुखात् अमृतद्रवसंयुतं पिबत भागवतं रसमालयं मुहुरहो रसिका भुवि भावुकाः। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। श्रीमद्भागवताख्योऽयं प्रत्यक्षः कृष्ण एव हि स्वीकृतोऽसि मया नाथ मुक्त्यर्थं भवसागरे मनोरथो मदीयोऽयं सफलः सर्वदा त्वया निर्विघ्नेनैव कर्तव्यो दासोऽहं तव केशव। श्रीहरये नमः श्रीहरये नमः श्रीहरये नमः। गोपिका जीवनस्मरणं गोविन्दा गोविन्दा। Okay, so we'll do a review of the second chapter from 12 to 20, from 12 to 34, right? Maybe Revati, you can do one half, and Madhu, you can do one half. 12 to 23, one of you can do 24 to 34.
I'll start 12 to 24.
23, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. तच्छ्रद्धदाना मुनयो ज्ञानवैराग्ययुक्तया पश्यन् आत्मनि चात्मानं भक्त्या श्रुतगृहीतया अतः पुंपेत्विजश्रेष्ठ वर्णाश्रमविभागशः स्वनुष्ठितस्य धर्मस्य संसिद्धिर्हरिदोक्षणं तस्माकेतेन मनसा भगवान् सात्वतां पतिः श्रोतव्य कीर्तितव्यश्च ध्येयः पूज्यश्च नित्यता यत् अनुद्यासिना युक्ताः कर्म क्रन्ति निबन्धनं चिन्तन्ति कोविदास्तस्य को न कुर्यात् गतारतिं शुश्रूषोः श्रद्धानस्य वासुदेव कथारुचिः स्यान्महत्सेवया विभ्राः पुण्यतीर्थनिषेवनात् शृण्वतां स्वकथां कृष्णः पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तनः हृद्यन्तस्थो ह्यभद्राणि विदुनोति सुहृत्सतां नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी तथा रजस्तमो भावाः कामलोपादयश्चये छेदयेतैरनावित्तं स्थितं सत्त्वे प्रसीदति एवं प्रसन्नमनसो भगवद्भक्तियोगतः भगवत्तत्त्वविज्ञानं मुक्तसङ्गस्य जायते विद्यते हृदयग्रन्थिः चिद्यन्ते सर्वसंशयाः क्षीयन्ते शास्य कर्माणि दृष्ट एवात्मानीश्वरे अथो वै कवयो नित्यं भक्तिं परमया मुदा वासुदेवे भगवती कुर्वन्ति आत्मप्रसादनी
அது வந்து அந்த sorry, the last kurvanti atma is two different words, correct da? But I think when it gets joined it becomes kurvantyatma.
Oh, कुर्वन्त्यात्मप्रसादतीं सत्वं रजस्तम इति प्रकृतेर्गुणास्तैः युक्तः परः पुरुषः एह इहास्य तत्ते स्थितित्यातये हरिविरिञ्चि हरेति संज्ञाः श्रेयांसि तत्र खलु सत्त्व तनोर्नृणां स्युः
Stop there. Stop there. Yes.
Rajesh,
No.
Rajesh, one quick question. In the second line, is it Purusha or Purusha? Because book in the download panina idhula Purusha nu potrukku.
இல்ல புருஷ பரஃப்
पुरुष தான் எங்களுக்கு
short
Short da, no? Oh.
Yeah.
So correct.
Rajesh, question.
Yeah.
16th sloka. Is it Sushrusha Shraddhadanasya or is there a Visargam like Sushrusho?
It's shru shoho. Okay. So that visarga becomes a ish. So shru shosh shraddhadanasya.
Okay, thank you.
पार्थिवा तारुणो धूमः तस्मात् अग्निस्त्रयीमयः तमसस्तु रजस्तस्मात् सत्वं यत् ब्रह्मदर्शनं पेजीरे मुनयोदाग्रे भगवन्तम् अधोक्षजं सत्वं विशुद्धं क्षेमाय कल्पन्त्येनुदानिह मुमुक्षवो कोररूपान् हित्वा भूतबदीनत नारायण कलाशान्ताः भजन्ति अनसूयवः रजस्तम प्रकृतयः समशीला भजन्ति वै पितृभूत प्रजेशादीन् श्रियैश्वर्य प्रजेप्सवः वासुदेव परा वेदाः वासुदेव परा महाः वासुदेव परा योगाः वासुदेव परा क्रियाः वासुदेव परं ज्ञानं वासुदेव परं तपः वासुदेव परो धर्मो वासुदेव परा गतिः स एव तं ससर्जाग्रे भगवान् आत्ममायया सत् असत्रूपया सासौ गुणमय्या गुणो विभुः
मधु அந்த first lineல ச ஏவேதம்.
Okay, sorry. स एवेदम्. दया विलसितेष्वेषु गुणेषु गुणवानिव अन्तःप्रविष्ट आबाधि विज्ञानेन विजृम्भितः यदा ह्यवहितो वह्निः तारुष्वेगस्वयोनिषु नानेव पादि विश्वात्मा भूतेषु सतता पुमान् असौ गुणमयैर्भावैः भूतसूक्ष्मेन्द्रियात्मभिः स्वनिर्मितेषु निर्विष्टो पुङ्क्ते भूतेषु तद्गुणान् भावयत् एष सत्त्वेन लोकान् वै लोकभावनः लीलावतारनुरतो देवत्रिर्यङ्नरातिषु इति श्रीमद्भागवते महापुराणे पारमहंस
We lost you, Madhu. Madhu, maybe she got disconnected. Okay. All right. So nothing new. Madhu, can you hear us? Because we couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
On the Srimad Bhagavati Andaratla, it got cut. But
Oh, sorry. I thought I finished.
no worries. That's okay. And the
Okay.
last line, last word on the Naradishu on the short U. Okay. So just make sure you
Okay.
make it
Okay.
out.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we'll do is we'll just catch up on the meaning for second chapter today. Then we'll start with the third. That way we'll be kind of in sync, right? So the second one kind of starts with the question. So in the previous chapter, the Saunaka Rishis posted 6 questions to Sutta Pauranika, which we saw. So, the Sutta Pauranika is now going to be answering those 6 questions. So he first starts by offering prayers, right? So the stanzas 2, 3, and 4, he's offering prayers. So first, of course, he offers prayers and namaskarams to Shuka Brahma, who says Shuka Brahma, who's in the heart of everybody else. And he starts off the best introduction, like, which we saw in the Mahatmyam, which is also is Shuka Brahman, even though he did not go through the formal training of Upanyasam, going through all the Vedic lessons, none of that was required for him, because the moment he was born, he was already a liberated Paramatma or Paramahamsa. So he had already renounced everything. And that Shuka Brahman, when he was going without any formal training, but he was already liberated, when he was walking, Veda Vyasa went after him, which is kind of what we saw in the thing. That's what he's saying here. Veda Vyasa went after him, calling Putra, Putra, but he doesn't even respond. But the trees were responding in return, because he was identified with everything that was there around in the forest. That is the second stanza where they're saying, I'm actually doing the namaskarams to you, O Shuka. Third stanza also starts with namaskaram to Shuka Brahman, saying that just because he realized that all the common people who are actually attached to material things, who are not able to cross over this material world, so Shuka Brahman is doing a blessing. He's only for the benefit of everybody. Out of great compassion, he's going to be saying this to Parikshit, so everybody else also gets the benefit. So for that, we are thanking Shuka Brahman. So we are offering prayers to the Guru by saying, thanks a lot for composing this, without which we wouldn't have been able to do this. Then the next one, they start by saying, I'm doing namaskaram to the one and only Sriman Narayana, who's the Supreme Lord. Then also to the great Rishi Nara and Narayana, as well as Goddess Saraswati, who is the goddess of learning, and to Vyasa Deva. We can't ignore Vyasa, right? But at the end of the day, Vyasa is the one who compiled it and gave it to Shuka itself. So also doing namaskarams to Vyasa, because without him, even Shuka wouldn't have got this. So that's the first kind of salutations that we do. That's why some of this is also coming in the Dhyana Stokam, because we are also doing this, because same thing comes in the Dhyana Stokam also. So with that, then Sutta Pauranika now gets into answering the questions. So he starts off by saying, the questions you have asked is perfect questions. So because sometimes when we try to question somebody, right, the way we ask and the type of question, the words we use, they don't even feel like answering, because it's not worth my time, because you're just calling me to fight with you, right? So Sutta Pauranika says, the questions you ask are fantastic. He says, number one, because they're all related to Krishna. So it says it's related to Krishna. So I'm very happy to answer this to you. Second, he says the questions you are asked are not just to elevate you, because sometimes you may ask somebody, how do I become better? He says the questions you are asking is not just for your purpose. It is for the benefit of the entire world. So he says, because of those 2 questions, are very relevant questions. It talks about Krishna. It is going to benefit the whole world. So he's saying, it's my pleasure to answer these questions for you, right? So he gets into answering the first question, which is, they said, explain to us in very simple terms what occupation or dharma or karma one should do, or by doing which is the ultimate good for people in general. They say, explain it in very simple terms. So in all of this Bhagavatam also, we'll see that anytime somebody is answering, they first give a very quick executive summary, and then they get into the details. So here he answers in a simple one line. He says, it can do anything you want, but if the outcome of that is going to result in devotion to Lord Bhagavan, it's the appropriate thing to do. He says there's nothing that you can do. There's nothing saying you can't do this. You cannot. He'll get into the details. But he says net is you measure what you're doing and see at the end of doing that work, is my bhakti going up towards the Lord? If the bhakti is going to go up at the end of doing that work, that's the ultimate good thing that anybody can do. So that's one way he starts off the question. And then he goes on to describe how should that bhakti be. So he gives two characteristics of the bhakti. One, he says that bhakti should be unmotivated bhakti. Like we discussed in the past, it cannot be tied to some reason, right? It cannot be tied to the fact that I need this in return or I want this to happen. Because he says the moment that is done, it is conditional. Then the moment that thing happens, the bhakti will go away. So irrespective of what the outcome of your expectations are, the bhakti should be unmotivated. It should be a costless bhakti. That's number one. Two, he says the bhakti should be uninterrupted bhakti, which means it cannot be that, okay, 8 to 9, I'll pray. Then I'm not going to worry about, because I've already done my 1 hour of prayer. So I have a pause, I have a stop. The bhakti should be there all the time. So those are the two main characteristics he's defining of the bhakti that should be there. So any work he's saying that you're doing should result in bhakti, which is kind of doing these two things, right, towards the Supreme Lord. And he'll get into a little bit more details of that. So he says that's the main two characteristics, he says. So then he says, when you look at the humans, when you have the Varna and the Ashrama, the Varna is the class, the social class. And that is also not by birth, right? So you can be a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, depending on the type of work we do. And like I think we've discussed sometime in the past, all of us do a little bit of everything. So it's not like, we are only one or the other. We may call ourselves one, but we do all the work. We do the cleaning, we go, we do work, we also make money. We are a Vaishya, we do everything. So we do all four. He says your Varna does not matter. The ashrama you are in, which is whether you are a student or a grihastha or you are a retired or a person who's going to the forest or you're sannyasi, even that doesn't matter. So in any ashrama that you are there, in any varna you are there, no matter what work you do, again, it comes and says, as long as that work is resulting in devotion to the Lord, that's the ultimate work. And he's saying if you're doing any work which is not related to that, in stanza 8, he says, Shrama evahi kevalam. He says it is just useless work that you're doing because you're just putting all that effort, but it is of absolutely no value at the end of the day. It will give you short-term money and everything, but at the end of the day, it doesn't benefit you in the longer term. For the purpose of this life, it's useless. That's what he's saying here, right? In the summary of how that bhakti needs to be and what work you need to be doing. And then he goes on to say that in the next one, he says the work kind of even if you're doing religious prayers, you're doing homam, you're doing all of that stuff. He says all of them should never be done for a material gain, because because the gains, of course, will come. You go pray, you will get the good things, bad things may not happen to you. But he says anytime it is associated with material gain, and that is then used to then satisfy your senses. Because if you think of it, any gain we use it to satisfy one of our 5 senses all the time, or mind, which is the 6th one. So he says anytime it is associated with all of that, it is not going to make sense. It is just a waste of your time. You're focusing on the wrong things. So he says, summary in this, he says is the highest perfection one can achieve is by doing something which is to please the Bhagavan. So then he goes on to explain, how do you get this bhakti? So he tells very well, there are two choices, he says. One of them, he says, is like we've discussed in the past, that ekagra chittam, which is the one-pointed attention and devotion to the Lord, which you can get by hearing about the Lord, by singing about the Lord, by praising, about doing all of that stuff. That is one option. He says, if you cannot do it, then he says you have to serve the devotees who are such great people, who are doing it, right? And I think I won't get into too much details, but when we see Narada Charitram, we're going to see that benefit of what will come by serving people who are great Bhagavatas, right? That's what is going to happen to Narada. So anyway, so he says those are the two possibilities. Either you do it on your own or you go serve people who are actually doing it, because that is also equally beneficial by actually doing this. So that's one thing he's explaining of how you actually get the bhakti. And then he very nicely talks about that the one way to eliminate, what is the roadblock for this, right? The roadblock for this is the desire that is there in your heart. He says one way to eliminate the desire is association with Bhagavata. And that Bhagavata also is breaking into 2 different parts. He's saying it could be Bhagavatam, which is the book which has got the stuff, or it is the Bhagavatas, are the people who are actually, who learn, who chant, who read, and who talk about Bhagavatam, which is the same thing like we said earlier. Those are the 2 things. Because he says, a Bhagavata, a true devotee Bhagavata, is as good as the Bhagavatam. Because he says the Bhagavata leads his life, his or her life, just like how Bhagavatam has prescribed it. And Bhagavatam is also equally important because Bhagavatam also talks a lot about the Bhagavatas, right? So he says these two are very interconnected. So you can either take up the Bhagavatam or you can take up the Bhagavata or serving the Bhagavata. So that's kind of what is very similar to saying either you do it or you go serve somebody who is actually doing that piece, right? So that's why he goes on to talk through some of those things. And then, like, of course, we say he then gives very clearly 3 steps. He says, first, you have to get the devotional service, which is kind of what we saw, how you get it by attending the class, by chanting, by singing, by hearing, all of that, you get the devotional service. He says, once you get that devotional service established in your heart, then he says automatically over a period of time, it says, the lust, the passion, the greed and jealousy, all the material bad qualities which are there, we'll say will automatically go away. Because it's like kind of, we think of it as a fixed space. The more you load it up with all of this good stuff, he says the bad stuff will start trickling away gradually and eventually you will become pure. And says eventually once you become completely pure, he says you'll automatically gain knowledge of the Supreme Lord as to who the Supreme Lord is, kind of understanding that you are one with him. That will automatically come because that's what he says all the great Munis, Rishis and everybody have done is starting with just devotion, and that will automatically get into all of these things, right? So that's the majority of what he talks through. And then at the very end, in 28, when it comes there, Vasudeva Paravedaha, he's talking about the great Vasudeva, which is talking about Krishna, right? He's saying in all the scripture, Vasudeva Para Vedaha, he says that all the scriptures and all of the Vedas, the ultimate object of what they're actually talking about or praising is Vasudeva. Vasudeva Para Makaha. He says the purpose of performing all the sacrifices and yajnas and everything is to please Vasudeva. Vasudeva Para Yoga. Again, the yoga, like we said, is the meaning comes from the root word yuj, which is union. So he says the purpose of the Ashtanga Yoga and everything is also union with Vasudeva. And Vasudeva Para Kriyaha, all the activities you're performing, which give you material benefits, are also for his purpose given by Vasudeva alone. Param Jnanam, he is the supreme knowledge. Param Tapaha, all the severe austerities and penance which you are performing are also for Vasudeva. Vasudeva Paramo Dharmo. So all the religious dharma that you are performing is also to please Vasudeva. And Paragatihi, he is the ultimate realization or goal of this life. So with that, he kind of talks about the importance of Vasudeva in the context of this bhakti and answers the question, couple of questions of what is the simplest, simple way of explaining what the ultimate goal in life is. And who is the Sri Krishna? Who's the Vasudeva? How do you define that Vasudeva? He's summarizing very beautifully in this few stanzas of saying he's the ultimate person. And then the last couple of things are going to overlap with the next one, where he kind of, talks about, in the beginning, the Lord kind of with his own energy, he created the material world. And then he himself got into the world and then expanded into the 14 worlds, which we're going to see in the next chapter as well. So he kind of talks about introducing that, of how that creation is happening, of how he goes and divides it into the 14 worlds. And just like how the quality, just like how a fire is there in every part of the wood, because you can burn any portion of the wood, the fire is there, saying that way, the Paramatma is there in everybody, in every ounce of thing. There is no portion where the Paramatma is not there. And he is himself who is there in all the men, women, demigods, asuras and everything. And he takes different incarnations because he realizes all of them have gone away from good. So he takes his incarnations to bring them all back to bring him back to him, right? Bring him back to the Paramatma. That's the purpose of it. So with this, he gives like a quick summary of the first few questions that were actually asked. And then we'll jump into Adhyayam 3, where, I think some of these I want to explain stanza by stanza because it's very simple and it's also relevant. So we'll talk through the next set of questions, right? So in this, the questions he's going to be answering are around the various incarnations. What are the various incarnations the Lord has actually taken? What are the various activities he's performed in those incarnations, right? And then where did Krishna, what happened to Krishna? Just a quick summary he's going to explain in this. So as we go through this is going to literally talk about all the incarnations of the Lord. So it'll be one paragraph. So we won't go into details because for each of them, the Sutta Puranika and Parikshita are going to be kind enough to ask about each of them later. So he's going to talk about each of the avatarams, but here is literally going to give the sequence of all the incarnations of the Lord in one dashakam. It's an amazing chapter. So it's like you're praying to all the incarnations in one chapter, right? In this one. So let's see. So I had so Anandji, you can be student, and then Shubhadra, you can be first half. Okay. So Sutau Vacha Jagrihe Paurusham Rupam Bhagavan Mahadadibihi Sambhutam Shodashakalam. So that ma that is there will split it. Shodashakalam Adau Loka Sisrikshaya. So let me just start off with this, right? So the first incarnation, first avataram of the Lord, he says, when there was absolutely nothing, right? The first beginning of the creation, he says, the Lord took himself into a form called as a Purusha. That is the first incarnation, right? And he says the purpose of this Purusha was to say, for me to create the material world, what are all the ingredients which are required? Because you need to have ingredients to create something. So there are two worlds we're going to see in this, right? There is a spiritual world, there is a material world. The material world is the whole Brahmandam and everything. So is that material world, what is required to create that material world? So that this Purusha's primary responsibility was to create the essence and the ingredients which was actually going to be required to create it. So we saw this in Dashakam 5 of Narayaniam. It's going to come much more detail later. So we'll kind of cover the creation at this time. So he says primarily the Indriyangal and the Mahat and the mind, kind of all of the basic ingredients were first created by this Purusha. That was particular number one. So he says in this, the spiritual sky where the Vaikuntham is, where the Lord is residing, and then there is a material sky where, or the material portion where everything else is, right? And he says that is still a very insignificant portion of the whole thing, but that is the place where all creation, all avatarams, everything is going to be happening in that other portion, which is part of the material part of the region. Suthau vacha jagrihe paurusham rupam bhagavan mahadadibihi sambhutam shodashakalam adhau lokasi srikshaya.
तृतीयोऽध्यायः सूत उवाच जगृहे पुरुषं रूपं भगवान् महदादिभिः सम्भूतं षोडशकलम् आदौ लोकस्य सृष्टया.
Anandji, that first line is paurusham rupam should be.
Sure, paurusham. Yeah, I read it wrong. सूत उवाच जगृहे पौरुषं रूपं भगवान् महदादिभिः सम्भूतं षोडशकलम् आदौ लोकस्य सृष्टया.
तृतीयोऽध्यायः सुत उवाच जगृहे पौरुषं रूपं भगवान् महदादिभिः सम्भूतं षोडशकलम् आदौ लोकसृक्षया. सिसृक्षया जगृहे पौरुषं रूपं भगवान् महदादिभिः सम्भूतं षोडशकलम् आदौ लोकसृक्षया.
So the next 2, 3, 4, right? I'll kind of try to say the meaning together because it flows easily. But yasyam bhasi shayanasya, comma, yoga nidram vitanvatah nabhi hrad ambujad asit. 3 words there. Hrad ambujad asit, or you can say it together, hrad ambujad asit, comma, brahma vishwasrijam patihi. Yasyam bhasi shayanasya yoga nidram vitanvatah nabhi hradam bujadasit brahma vishwasrijam patihi.
यस्यां भसि शयानस्य योगनिद्रां विदन्वतः नाभिहृदाम्बुजादासीत् ब्रह्म विश्वस्रजां पतिः. यस्यां भसि शयानस्य योगनिद्रां विदन्वतः नाभिहृदाम्बुजादासीत् ब्रह्म विश्वस्रजां पतिः.
यस्यां भसि शयानस्य योगनिद्रां वितन्वतः नाभिहृताम्बुजादासीत् ब्रह्मा विश्वसृजां पतिः. यस्यां भसि शयानस्य योगनिद्रां वितन्वतः नाभिहृताम्बुजादासीत् ब्रह्मा विश्वसृजां पतिः.
Yasya vayava samsthanaihi, comma, kalpito loka vistaraha tadvai bhagavato rupam, comma, vishuddham sattvam urjitam. यस्यावयव संस्थानैः कल्पितो लोकविस्तरः तद्वै भगवतो रूपं विशुद्धं सत्त्वमूर्जितम्.
यस्यावयव संस्थानैः कल्पितो लोकविस्तरः तद्वै भगवतो रूपं विशुद्धं सत्त्वमूर्जितम्. यस्यावयव संस्थानैः कल्पितो लोकविस्तरः तद्वै भगवतो रूपं विशुद्धं सत्त्वमूर्जितम्.
यस्यावयव संस्थानैः कल्पितो लोकविस्तरः तद्वै भगवतो रूपं विशुद्धं सत्त्वमूर्जितम्. यस्यावयव संस्थानैः कल्पितो लोकविस्तरः तद्वै भगवतो रूपं विशुद्धं सत्त्वमूर्जितम्.
पश्यन्त्यदो रूपम adabra, if you want to break it, रूपम adabra चक्षुषा, comma, सहस्र पादोरु भुजाननाद्भुतम, one word, भुजाननाद्भुतम, सहस्र मूर्ध श्रवणाक्षि नासिकम, comma, सहस्र मौल्यंबर कुंडलोल्लसत, double कुंडलोल्लसत. पश्यन्त्यदो रूपमदभ्रचक्षुषा सहस्रपादोरुभुजाननाद्भुतं सहस्रमूर्धश्रवणाक्षिनासिकं सहस्रमौल्यंबरकुण्डलोल्लसते.
पश्यन्त्यन्दो रूपमदभ्रचक्षुषा सहस्रपादोरुभुजाननाद्भुतं सहस्रमूर्धश्रवणाक्षिनासिकां सहस्रमूल्याम्बरकुण्डललोल्लसत्. पश्यन्त्यन्दो रूपमदभ्रचक्षुषा सहस्रपादोरुभुजाननाद्भुतं सहस्रमूर्धश्रवणाक्षिनासिकं सहस्रमौल्याम्बरकुण्डललोलसत्.
That last line, Anandji, Maulyambara. I think you said Maulyambar. Maulyambara.
सहस्रमौल्यम्बरकुण्डललोलसत्.
No, that one. Kundalollasat.
कुण्डलोलसत्.
Yeah, that's it.
पश्यन्त्यदो रूपमदप्रचक्षुषा सहस्रपादोरुपजाननात्पुदं सहस्रमूर्धश्रवणाक्षिनासिकं सहस्रमौल्यम्बरकुण्डलोल्लसत्. पश्यन्त्यदो रूपमदप्रचक्षुषा सहस्रपादोरुपजाननाद्भुतं श्रवणाक्षिनासिकं सहस्रमौल्यम्बरकुण्डलोल्लसत्.
And the first line, the Bhujananadbhutam. Bhu. That's what you have, right? Sahasra Padoru Bhujananadbhutam.
भुजाननाद्भुतं.
Yeah.
सहस्रपाद.
Etan Nanavathāranam, comma, Nidanam Bhijam Avyayam, Yasyam Shamshena, Yasya Amsha, that's it. Yasya Amsha Amshena. So Yasyam Shamshena Srijyante, comma, Deva Tiryang Naradayah. So I'll just kind of say the 2 to 5, right? So it's going to get a little technical in terms of terminal names. So we know one Vishnu, right? We say one Vishnu. So Bhagavatam breaks it by different types of Vishnus who are there. So it says this Purusha that we are talking about. He says the first Purusha is called as the Karanodakashayi. Karana Udakashayi. Think of those two words. Karanodakashayi Vishnu, he says. Because he says this Karanodakashayi Vishnu, he says from him innumerable universes are just coming up all the time. There's no one, multiple universes which are keep coming up all the time. So this Karanodakashayi Vishnu or the Purusha, who's just given a name, right? That and I'll use he very loosely. So don't that doesn't mean it's a male, right? So I'm just using it as comes from my mouth. So this Karanodakashayi Vishnu or Purusha, he creates the core material ingredients to create the material universes, right? He creates. So now, once that universe is there, right? Then he says this Purusha himself, because we cannot visualize, and fundamentally Bhagavatam says this Purusha does not have a form. But
It says you can visualize this Purusha as somebody who has all these universes inside of him. Because at the end of the day, all of them are embedded in him. And says even then it only constitutes a portion of the Purusha. But he says that's one way for you to imagine. Else, how can you imagine this Purusha, right? You can't give it a form. So he says for normal people, you can imagine this, all these universes is inside this Purusha. That's quite not the Virat Swarupam. I'll kind of come to that. Now, once multiple of these universes are there, right? Now, each of these universes is going to have a Brahma and everything which we're going to see. So he says for each of this, right, there is another version of this Purusha who's called as a Garbhodakashayi, Garbha Udakashayi, Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, who's there. He says this Garbhodakashayi Vishnu is also like it's not quite, you can't call it an incarnation, but you can call it 1B of it, right? Which is kind of the portion of the Purusha who's responsible for that particular universe, because there are multiple universes, right? So there has to be an owner for each of this universe. So this Garbhodakashayi Purusha who's there, or the Vishnu who is there, he says from his Nabhi, right, comes this bud, which is essentially everything which is required to create that universe. And like we saw in Dashakam 5 of Narayaniyam, and we're going to go more into details of this later on, but just a quick summary, because just to understand who is who. He says that this Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, who's lying in the Garbhodaka ocean, which is at the bottom, from his Nabhi comes this bud, and then that has all the ingredients required for that universe, which he then gets into and divides it into the 14 worlds that we know, the 14 layers of the worlds that we saw. Atala, Sutala, Patala, Vitala, everything that is there, Satyaloka, all of those 14 worlds are divided from the bud which is coming from this. Now, this Garbhodakashayi Vishnu who is there, and because and that's why it's called Garbhodaka ocean, because he's kind of at the bottom of it, and from him all of this thing comes, right? Now, this Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, further what happens is, in this universe which has been created, there are three things. So at the very top in Satyaloka, Brahma is there. So Brahma is like the engineer of the universe, right? So he is responsible for taking care of everything that actually needs to happen. But from Brahma come Marichi, and all of those are going to come later, right? That happens from Brahma, that they all creation, everything is taken care from Brahma. But the maintenance of this universe, everything which is required for the maintenance of the universe, where do all the souls, where all they all come from? All of them, the incarnations, where they all come from, is another Vishnu, right? And so this Vishnu is called as the Kshirodakashayi, Kshirodakashayi Vishnu, who's there, who is responsible for the maintenance of this universe, from whom all these individual souls come. So from whom all the incarnations happen in this universe, and to whom, when Brahma and others say, I'm going to go meet Vishnu in Vaikuntham, like we say, there is like a Karya Vaikuntham which is inside this Brahmandam. This is that Vishnu, they all go and pray, and from whom all the incarnations happen. So they're kind of separating these Purushas, because they're saying there are so many universes. So each of it you kind of delegate, you kind of think of it as delegation of responsibility, right? So he says that's all they're talking about, all these different kinds of Purushas they're talking about. Each one has a role to play, and at the end of the day, they are no different than the main Purusha who's there. So we cannot say this is partial, that is full, and all that. It is the same thing. It is just doing different work, right? So that is how they are actually separating all of this thing. And then they say, then Brahma is there at the top of the Satyaloka, Brahma sits, and that is the first incarnation of the Lord, is Purusha, who has all this work to do. So at the end of the day, and from Brahma, eventually we see how Rudra is coming. So all this Brahma who is there, the Shiva that is there, the Kshirodakashayi Vishnu are there, are all coming from the Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, who is responsible for the 14 worlds in this one universe. And then all of them eventually are created by the main Vishnu, who they are calling as a main Purusha, right? So that is up to stanza 5. And this goes into details of creation later on. It's going to come. So stanza 6, I'm just checking time. So sa eva pratamam devaha kaumaram sargamastitaha chachara duscharam brahma brahmacharyam akhanditam. So again, this is quickly talks about, from this Brahma came the 4 Sanat Kumaras. The Kumaras came from the Brahma. So they still, first avataram only is going on, but is continuing that, saying Brahmas, Kumaras came, and they have a purpose, which is to kind of tell how to reach Brahman through austerities and penance. That was the purpose of these Kumaras. Saheva pratamam devaha Kaumaram sargamastitah.
Nagesh, we didn't chant 5.
Chachara duschcharam. Sorry, what a question?
We didn't chant 5.
Oh, we didn't chant. Oh, sorry. Etannanavataranam nidanam bijamabhyayam yasyam shamshena srijyante devatiryang naradayah.
Edannanavadharana nidanam bijamavyam yasyam shamshena sansrijyante devatiryang naradayah. Edannanavadharana nidanam bijamavyam yasyam shamshena srijyante devatiryang naradayah.
एतन्नानावताराणां निधानां बीजमव्ययं यस्यां शांशेन सृज्यन्ते देवतिर्यं नरादयः एतन्नानावताराणां निधानं बीजमव्ययं यस्यां शांशेन सृज्यन्ते देवतिर्यं नरादयः
Sa eva pratamam devah, comma, Kaumaram sargamastitah, Chachara duschcharam brahma, comma, Brahmacharyam akhanditam. If you want to break it, that ma. Sa eva pratamam devah, Kaumaram sargamastitah, Chachara duschcharam brahma, Brahmacharyam akhanditam.
स एव प्रथमं देवः कौमारं सर्गमास्थितः जजारदुश्चरं ब्रह्मा ब्रह्मचर्यमखण्डितम् स एव प्रथमं देवः कौमारं सर्गमास्थितः जजारदुश्चरं ब्रह्मा ब्रह्मचर्यमखण्डितम्
स एव प्रथमं देवः कौमारं सर्गमाश्रितः चचार दुश्चरं ब्रह्मा ब्रह्मचर्यमखण्डितम्
Shubhadra, sargam astitah.
सर्गम् आश्रितः
Astitah.
आस्थितः वा
Ama.
आश्रितः निद्लर्के
Okay, just change it to astitah.
आस्थितः ओके स एवं प्रथमं देवः कौमारं सर्गमास्थितः चचार दुश्चरं ब्रह्मा ब्रह्मचर्यम् अखण्डितम्
And the first line, like a one, just a vara. There's no im there. Okay.
स एव प्रथमं देवः
Yeah.
कौमारं सर्गमास्थितः चचार दुश्चरं ब्रह्मा ब्रह्मचर्यम् अकण्ठितम्
Okay. I think today we'll just continue with you both because there's only 20 minutes left. I think next time we may have to consider increasing the class to an hour and a half because there's so much meaning in these things, right? That we don't get to complete stanzas. Dvitiyam tu bhavayasya, comma, rasatala gatam mahim uddharishyan upadatta, if you want to break it, uddharishyan upadatta, comma, yagneshas saukaram vapuhu. So he says the second avataram. So we talk about the Purusha, which is all these things we spoke about extensively. He says second avataram, he says, is the Varaha avataram of yours. He says when, and of course, a lot of things happen between the first and the second, which that's not the intention of this Dashakam, right? This chapter is just talking about avatarams. So a lot of things happen, but it says the second avataram of yours is that of the Varaha avataram, where when the earth was not ready for civilization, it was in the Garbhodakashayi ocean, in the very bottom of it. So you took the Varaha avataram to rescue earth and put it back in its place so that civilization and the creation can actually happen there. So dvitiyam tu bhavayasya rasatalagatam mahim uddharishyan upadatta yajnesha saukaram vapuhu.
Didiyam tu bhavayasya prasadalagada mahim uddharishan nuvadata yajnesha saukaram babuhu. Didiyam tu bhavayasya prasadalagada mahim uddharishan nuvadata yajnesha saukaram babuhu.
And the second line, upadatta.
Wow. Uddharishan nuvadatta.
okay द्वितीयं तु उभवायास्य प्रसादलगतां महीम् उद्धरिष्यन्नुपादत्त यज्ञे स सौकरं वपुः द्वितीयं तु भवायास्य प्रसादलगतां महीम् उद्धरिष्यन्नुपादत्त यज्ञेशः सौकरं वपुः.
Tritiyam Rishi. You can say Tritiyam Rishi. Tritiyam Rishi Sargam cha, comma. Devarshitvam upetya saha. Tantram Satvatam achashta, comma. Naishkarmyam karmanam yataha. Says the third avataram of yours was in the Tritiyam Rishi Sargam, which is in the Rishi millennium, which is the Satya Yuga. So at Satya Yuga, then you then appeared in the form of Sri Narada himself. So he says Narada himself is an incarnation of you, because again, all of these incarnations have a purpose. So like the incarnation purpose of Narada was to say how to promote the devotion all over across all these universes, because we see everybody goes and respects sage Narada, right? So whether he comes to meet Hiranyakashipu listens to him. He comes to meet Kamsa respects to him. He comes to meet Prahlada, he helps Prahlada. So he of course goes and he's accepted widely by everybody as a very religious spiritual person. So Narada was one of your avataram to promote devotional service to everybody. So,
Rajeshji, so in the Mahatmyam, we heard about Narada's multiple Janmas, right? So this is probably the latter one?
The current one, yes, the current one. Yeah. All of these things that they talk about, right, in general, both in Narayaniam and in this thing, is the current Brahma's current Kala only they talk about. They don't go before that. So it's all talking about that. Before that, what happened, we don't know, because it's not kind of written anywhere.
Okay.
Right, all of that is current, the 51st year, first day of Brahma. That's kind of where all of these things they talk about.
Thank you.
Prithiham Rishi Sargam cha Devarshitvam sah Tantram Satvatamachashta Naishkarmyam Karmanam Yatah.
Pritiyam Rishi Sargam cha Devarshitvam sah Tantram Satvatamachashta Naishkarmyam Karmanam Yatah. Tridiyam Rishi Sargam cha Devarshitvam sah Tantram Satvatamachashta Naishkarmyam Karmanam Yatah.
तृतीयं ऋषिसर्गं च देवर्षित्वमुपेत्य सः तन्त्रं सात्वतमाचष्ट नैष्कर्म्यं कर्मणां यतः. तृतीयं ऋषिसर्गं च देवर्षित्वमुपेत्य सः तन्त्रं सात्वतमाचष्ट नैष्कर्म्यं कर्मणां यतः.
That's a nice. Turye Dharma Kala Sarge, Nara Narayana Vrishi Bhutvatmopashamopetam. So that's what you cannot break it. So Bhutvatmopashamopetam, that ma that is there, you put a im and a comma. Next word starts with a a. Akarod Dushcharam Tapaha. So is the fourth incarnation of yours is Nara and Narayana Rishi, who are actually born to the Dharma Deva. So, if you know in the 16th Dashakam of Narayanam, it comes Murtir hi Dharma Grihini Sushuve Bhavantam Narayanam Narasakam Nagitanubhavam. So, both Nara and Narayana are born. That is the fourth incarnation of yours, born as a twins, Nara and Narayana there. So, Turye Dharma Kala Sarge Nara Narayana Vrishi Bhutvatmopashamopetam Akaro Duscharam Tapah.
Trityo Dharma Kala Sarge Nara Narayana Vrishi Bhutvatmopashamopetam Agarod Dushcharam Tapah. Agarod Dushcharam Tapah. Tvirye Dharma Kala Sarge Nara Narayana Vrishi Bhutva. How do you say?
See that word, it's Bhutva is one word. Atmopashamopetam is one other word. Okay. But because that S and S symbol are coming, you kind of try to say that thing together. So it's Bhutvatmopashamopetam.
Okay. Bhutvatmopas. Is it correct? Bhutvatmopa?
Yeah, correct.
Shamopa. Bhutvatmopa Shamopetam Agaro Duscharam Tapaha.
Yeah, I mean that there's no easy way to break it. Unfortunately, it's because it's one word that because it's Atma, Upashama, Upetam, 3 different words. The U is coming, so you can't break it. So you have to kind of say it together, you know.
Bhutva Totma. Okay. Okay.
तुर्ये धर्मकला सर्गे नर नारायण वृषि भूत्वात्मोपशमो वेदम् अकरोद्दुश्चरं तपः तुर्ये धर्मकला सर्गे नर नारायण वृषि भूत्वात्मोपशमोपेतम् अकरोद्दुश्चरं तपः.
Consultant. Panchamah Kapilo Nama, Siddeshah Kala Viplutam, Provacha Suraye Sankyam, Tattva Grama Vinirnayam. So it's pretty straightforward. The 5th avataram was born as Kapila, the Rishi Kapila, because you are there to explain Sankhya philosophy or the metaphysics of everything that is there, and to Devahuti, your mother. And Kapilopakyanam in Bhagavatam has got several chapters which talk about it. So we'll talk about what that philosophy is much later. Panchamah Kapilo Nama Siddeshah Kala Viplutam Provacha Surahe Sankyam Tattvagrama Vinirnayam.
Panchama Kapilo Nama Siddesha Kala Viplutam Provacha Suriye Sankyam Tattvagrama Vinirnayam. Panchama Kapilo Nama Siddesha Kala Viplutam Provacha Suriye Sankyam Tattvagrama Vinirnayam.
Panchamah Kapilo Nama Siddesha Kala Viplutam Provachasuraye Sankyam Tadvagrama Vinirnayam.
Subhadra, Provachasuraye.
Provachasuraye. Okay. Panchamah Kapilo Nama Siddesha Kala Viplutam Provachasuraye Sankyam Tadvagrama Vinirnayam.
Shashte Atrer Apatyatvam. If you want to break at that ra, Atrer Apatyatvam, comma, Britah Prapto Nasuyaya. Prapto Anasuyaya, but that will come together. Prapto Nasuyaya. Anvikshikim Alarkaya. So even this, you have to break it, that ma is the only choice. Anvikshikim Alarkaya, comma, Prahladadipya Uchivan. So
We
here,
have on Vishkin.
oh, sorry, Anvikshi. Sorry, my bad. Anvikshikim Alarkaya Prahladadipya Uchivan.
The
Say the
first
6th
word,
one.
Rajesh, sorry, is it Shashta or Shashte?
Shashte.
Shashte, okay.
Yeah. So the 6th one, the avataram he says, is to Anasuya and Rishi Atri. You know, who actually Anasuya went and prayed before Lord Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, saying, we want all of you together as a son. You are born as Dattatreya, right? So in the 36th chapter, Narayana, first stanza comes Atre Putrataya Pura Tvam Anasuyayam Hidatta Bido. That comes, right? In Parashuram Avataram, it first starts with Dattatreya. So that's what this is, the Dattatreya, the 6th avataram of the Lord. Shashte Atre Rapatyatvam Vritah Prapto Nasuhyaya Anvikshikim Alarkaya Prahladadibhya Uchivan.
Shashte Matre Rapatyatvam Vrata Prapto Nasuyaya Anveshiki Malarkaya Prahlada Bibhya Ujivan. Shashte Matre Rapatyatvam Vrata Prapto Nasuyaya Anveshiki Malarkaya Prahlada Ujivan.
And the first line, Shashte Atre, right? I think I heard you say something else.
Shashte Matre.
Atre. Atri. So Atrer.
Yeah, it's written here
It's all
together.
Matrer போட்டிருக்கு. Yeah.
Just change it to Atre. Sage Atri is a reference there. So Shashte Atre Rapatyatvam.
Shashte Atre Rapatyatvam. Tyatvam. Okay.
Apatyatvam.
Rapatyatvam.
Yeah.
Shashte Atre Rapatyatvam Vrita Prapto Anasuyaya आन्वीक्षिकीम् अलर्काय प्रह्लादादिभ्य ऊचिवान् षष्ठे अत्रेरवत्यत्वं वृतः प्राप्तो न सूयया आन्वीक्षिकीम् अलर्काय प्रह्लादादिभ्य ऊचिवान्
ततः सप्तम आकूत्यां रुचेर यज्ञोऽभ्यजायत स यामाध्यैस् suraganaihi. So the ra that is there, remove it, put a visarga comma, suraganaihi comma. Next word starts with the a. Aphat swayambhuvantaram. So one of the daughters of Swayambhuva Manu was Akuti. So to that Akuti, the Lord was born as Yajna, because what was happening was, when the transition was happening after the Swayambhuva Manu period, towards the end of that period, sometimes it's like we saw the Indra and all of them are posts, right? So it so happened that at that time there was no right person to be the Indra of that time. And the transition, because when the Manu transition happens, the Indra post also gets transition, or new person comes in. So at that time, when the transition was not there, the Lord then took birth as Yajna to be the Indra for the time being, till the next Indra was actually ready. So that is the next 7th avataram of the Lord. Tatas saptama akutyam rucher yajnobhyajayata sayamadhyai suraganaihi apat swayam bhuvantaram.
ततः सप्तम आगूत्य रुचेर्यज्ञो व्यजायते सयामाधे सुरगणैः आवत् स्वयं भुवनान्तरम्.
Aphat, the last word, aphat swayam bhuvantaram.
अभात् स्वयं भुवनान्तरम्. ततः सप्तम आगूत्य रुचेर्यज्ञो व्यजायते सयामाध्य सुरगणैः अभात् स्वयं भुवनान्तरम्.
And the end of the first line, jayatha.
Suraganaira, the second line, Suraganair about
And the suragan, the ra is there, right? You break the ra into ir and a. And the ir becomes a visarga.
Okay,
Suraganaihi.
Suraganaihi Jolanam. Okay.
And because you're pausing there. If you're not pausing there, we just continue with that ra.
Got it. Sure.
Okay. And Anji, you got the first line, right? Yeah.
What is the name of the avataram here? Yajnamurti?
No, it's just called Yajna.
Yajna.
Yajna. That's the name. You got that first line as Rucher Yajno Be Jayatha. You got the correction, right? Because you were saying Jayate.
Yeah, Jayata. Yeah.
Is it called Dhanvantri?
No. Dhanvantri Aparma.
Okay.
ततः सप्तम आगूत्यां रुचेर्यज्ञोऽप्यजायत स यामाद्यै सुरगणैः अपात् स्वायम्भुवान्तरम्. ततः सप्तम आगूत्यां रुचेर्यज्ञोऽभजायत स यामाद्यै सुरगणैः अपात् स्वायम्भुवान्तरम्.
We'll do one more and stop. Ashtame Meru Devyam tu, Nabher Jata Urukramaha Darshayan Vartma Dhiranam, Sarvashrama Namaskritam. So this is born to Meru Devi, and Nabhi is Rishabha Yogishwara, which was Dashakam 20 in Narayana. Rishabha Yogishwara, right? He was born Rishabha, and then he was also a great yogi, so he became Rishabha Yogishwara. So that is the 8th one here. Ashtame Meru Devyam tu Nabhe Jata Urukramaha Darshayan Vartma Dhiranam Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Ashtame Meru Devyam tu Nabhe Jata Urukramaha Darshayan Vartma Dhiranam Sarvashrama Namaskritam. Ashtame Meru Devyam tu Nabhe Jata Urukramaha Darshayan Vartma Dhiranam Sarvashrama Namaskritam.
Anji, the second line, Darshayan Vartma.
Vartma.
Yeah, there's a it in between va and ma there.
Oh, okay. Darshayan Vartma Dhiranam.
Yeah.
Ashtame Meru Devyam tu Nabherjata Urukramaha Darshayan Vartma Dhiranam Sarvashrama Namaskritam. Ashtame Meru Devyam tu नाभेर्जात उरुक्रमः दर्शयन् वर्त्मधीराणां सर्वाश्रमनमस्कृतम्.
Stop here today. Should probably consider making this an hour and a half, I feel, because otherwise with the meaning and the review, we're not able to complete enough, right? And only 2 people will get chance. So anyway, we'll think about that. Shri Hare Namaha, Shri Hare Namaha, Shri Hare Namaha. Gopika Jeevana Smaranam, Govinda Govinda, Sadgurunath Maharaj Ki Jai. कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृते स्वभावात् करोमि यत् सकलं परस्मै नारायणायेति समर्पयामि.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rajesh.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
I'll send a recording for these 13 stanzas. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rajesh.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rajesh.
Rajesh.
Bye, everyone.
Have a nice week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.